as a storyteller, you really have to, for the story to be any good, you have to care about the characters. You have to really like them or be interested in them. And I feel like by spending so much time with my dad as a character,
Mm-hmm.
I got to like him more.
So in doing the show, you unearthed another level of kind of love, compassion, connection to your dad.
Yeah.
Wow, that's powerful.
And ironically, through a medium of stand-up comedy that he never wanted me to do, right?
Yeah.
So the irony of the whole thing
So
is
he didn't want you to do stand-up at all?
Desperately not.
Just med school, law school?
Yeah, because he's a doctor. Yeah, I say this in the show, but he's a doctor. And then when I was a kid in his free time, he got his law degree. And I joke because I go, that's how much he didn't want to be a dad.
That is pretty remarkable.
He's like, what can I do in these slots of time when I would be parenting?
So I'm going to work a 50, 60-hour work week.
Yeah.
And then go to
law school.
At night.
Yeah.
Right.
But I do feel like by writing the show, I was able to, and it has brought me to a certain peace with my dad, which I feel like I desperately needed because I feel like I was at odds with him for a lot of my life.
Yeah. Isn't it funny how complicated fathers and sons are? There's so much I appreciate about my dad, and I've shared on the show a couple of times. One of the qualities my dad is to just uplift every room he went into. Like my dad, if he came in a room, he'd be like, Mike, it's so nice to meet you. I loved your special. Like, wow, your sweater matches your eyes. This is great. And, oh, you guys have a beautiful studio here. You guys are doing a great job. And, oh, Kartik, the producer's here. You're like a compliment, a joke, a comment, something like everywhere he went in. And I just appreciated that so much about him. There's a lot more about him that I appreciated as well. And his love of art and passion for art and storytelling. And he always was very supportive of me going into the arts, which I'm so grateful for. But then, isn't it funny, like you said, like your dad, like, well, I never want to do that. Like you talk in the show about your dad, like, where's my keys? And the whole family goes into a frenzy looking for your father's keys, and your mom is saying prayers to St. Anthony.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful sequence. And for me, also, like my dad taught me what I did not want to do or want to be.
Yeah.
Because my dad was in a lot of ways, a very sad, failed artist. He just wanted to be an artist.
Yeah.
But he was too insecure, afraid, traumatized to really try it, to really like get his books out there, get his paintings out there, pitch himself, network, any of that stuff. He was too fragile to do that. So in an odd way, I'm also grateful for my dad for what he couldn't do or wouldn't do or didn't have qualities of, because as soon as I kind of made a commitment, like, okay, I'm going to try and be an actor, I knew it was like, well, I'm not going to go down that path.
Right.
And I know I do need to network, and I do need to hustle.
Yeah.
And I do need to try and sell myself. And I, unfortunately, and it sucks putting on the business person's hat as an artist. It's the worst. Like, I hope you like me, please. Here's my new headshot. Will you look at my reel?
Sure.
It's a grotesque business, but I'm also really grateful to him for his failures.
Sure.
Is that a weird thing to say?
No, that makes sense.
You have so many beautiful moments in your special about working things out with your dad. You can see you, the comedian storyteller, kind of ironing out the bumpy road that you guys have had.
Yeah.
There's some just gorgeous moments of connection with a guy that has been almost impossible to connect with.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about that, a little bit about the healing process?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like this special, so I want to say this is like my 6th or maybe 7th comedy special. And I've always told stories, but this is the first time where I'm telling a story that I'm still living in. So in other words, my dad is still with us.
You still go visit him.
I go home every few weeks, and he's in tough shape, and so the last 2 years I've been talking about it. It's raw. I mean, my last 2 shows I did on Broadway, and this one I like sustained 90 or 100 performance runs. This one I did 6 nights at the Beacon, and then that was it, because I couldn't bring that to the audience every night, or because it's painful in real time.
So this was the most emotionally affecting one of all of your
by a long
tales.
long shot. Because it's like you're saying, it's unresolved. It doesn't feel like I'm fully there with it, you know? But I think, I think a lot of it was working through what it was that connected me to my dad and made me feel close to him. And, you know, I say in the show, it's like I have a few memories. When I was a kid, I was in the hospital for dehydration, and I was admitted in the hospital, and he came and he rubbed my shoulder for, 15 minutes. And it was like the slightest gesture, but I still remember it. And it's like that thing where you go, oh yeah, we weren't a physically affectionate family. And then I think about that in relation to my own daughter and my wife, and we're the opposite. I make the joke in the show, we're too much. Whatever too much is, we're gonna find out when she's a grown up. Something, everyone's always messing something up all the time.
Yeah, she'll be in a therapist's office 15 years from now. Like, they wouldn't stop hugging me.
Yeah, exactly.
I needed my
squeezing
space.
me and I couldn't breathe. Yeah, exactly.
I felt suffocated.
Yeah. But yeah, and one of the things that I came to realize literally as we were filming it, I thought, oh my God, my whole existence as being a parent, I've been trying to avoid what my parents, how they parented me.
Yeah.
And then at a certain point you realize no matter what you do, it's not going to be better. It's just going to be different. So like we went a year ago, I took Una to
well, but it could be better.
Could be better. Yeah, it could be better.
Yeah, I would say
but
too much hugging
subjective.
is maybe better than too little hugging.
Well, like I'll give you an example of what made me think of this. So a year ago, we took Una to the Vatican because the Pope invited a bunch of comedians. It was like Chris Rock and Stephen Colbert and Conan O'Brien, all these people. It was crazy. And I say it in the special. And I bring Una around and I'm like, this is the religion I was raised in, all this stuff. And then she goes, wait, but like, who is Jesus? And I was like, oh my God, I've left out so much because I was raised completely Catholic. I knew all this stuff, and I've left this out of her education entirely. And I was that was a realization for me of like, oh yeah, well, I haven't raised her in a religious tradition, and that is a deficit, I think, and that is an example of me overcorrecting because I feel like I was so deeply
interesting. So
in such a deeply religious upbringing.
You have an 11 or 12-year-old daughter who doesn't really know who Jesus is, and then you kind of go, ooh, maybe I did swing a little too far into the secular humanism.
Yeah, because when I was a kid, I feel like so much of my comedy career is a response to the Catholic repression that is common in central Massachusetts, where I grew up, or was when I grew up there in the 80s. Because, I was an altar boy. I went to church every week. I was fully immersed in Catholicism. And,
indoctrinated.
Yeah, and so much of it was like, and I talk about this in one of my first storytelling albums was called Sleepwalk With Me, and where I talk about how I sleepwalked through a second-story window many years ago. And I talk about how when I was a kid, my dad would say, like, don't tell anyone. Like, I would kind of go, and he'd be like, don't tell anyone that. Like, it was like a very repressive environment.
Wow.
And I think so much of my comedy is kind of like, yeah, tell everybody, who cares?
Yeah, that's interesting. So your act of rebellion and individuation was to tell everyone everything about you.
Yeah, exactly.
In the petri dish of a family that was like, don't tell people the details.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And of course, the thing that you discover when you tell people everything, or what I've discovered, because I've been traveling around the country and around the world for basically 25 years. I've been doing this. And you realize that there are no secrets. You tell people your deepest secret and they go, yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. I've seen that. I know exactly what you're talking about.
And you think that you're just ripping your soul wide open.
Yeah.
And they're going, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like our family.
That's amazing. Part of it is generational, though, too. I think when my father passed away, there is a singular story that reveals so much about my dad, which was how his mother passed away when he was like 9 years old. And it's the most heartbreaking story you could ever imagine. The nutshell version is his mom had tuberculosis and was in a TB hospital.
Wow.
And then they were going to take her out, and they went to go visit her, and then she waved to them from the window, and then she was grabbing her coat to leave, slipped, fell on the floor, hit her head, and died. And there's a lot more to the story than that, but I had written up this thing as part of the eulogy, and his sister and his wife, my stepmom, his widow, were just like, oh, no. You can't tell that story. He would not want that story told.
Really?
It was like, well, it's true. And I don't know that he wouldn't want that story told. He would want a good story told.
Yeah.
But they really were just like, please,
but
we
why?
beg. And
Too
they wrote
personal?
me. I still to this day don't understand why they would not want this story about him for people to hear it, for 57 people to hear it at a eulogy. I don't understand what that means.
Yeah.
But I do think it's a generational thing of like, we don't talk about that. We don't reveal this stuff.
Years ago, I went down that rabbit hole of genealogy where you look at your own genealogy and you find leaves and all that kind of stuff, family tree websites. Yeah. And you go back and you start to see like there's people in the family you didn't know about, and there's extra cousins and extra this and extra that. You know, there was a lot going on back then that people didn't talk about.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure. Well, they did say that when they did a DNA analysis of like 23andMe, and that there was a lot more incest going on than anyone ever knew about.
Right. Jesus.
So probably you're the product of incest, but
Jesus. I did not see this interview going in this direction.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for coming. Gotcha. This is a good.
That's a wrap.
I don't know that we're going to keep that section.
The Soul Boom Podcast. Subscribe now on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever else you get your stupid podcasts.